Hello and welcome to the history lessons. Today we're going to look at the ancient Egyptian social life, and we're going to look into the professions, Egyptian homes, clothing and jewelry, women, food and drink. And we're going to look more into that as well. But let's start with the profession. In ancient Egypt, there were definite social classes which were dictated by Egyptian profession. This social stratification is like a pyramid. At the bottom of the social pyramid were soldiers, farmers, and tomb builders who represented the great percentage of Egyptian population. The workers supported the professions above them, just as the base of the pyramid supported the rest of the structure. Above the workers were skilled craftsmen such as artists who used primitive tools to make everything from carts to coffins. And above the craftsmen were the scribes. These scribes were the only Egyptians who knew how to read and write, and therefore had many types of job opportunities. A scribe's duty range from writing letters for townspeople to recording harvests to keeping counts for the Egyptian army. Above these scribes were more scholarly scribes who had advanced to higher positions such as priests, doctors, engineers. Priests were devoted to their religious duties in the temples at the least 3 months out of every year, during which time they will never leave the temple. At other times they worked as judges and teachers. The medical profession of ancient Egypt had its own hierarchy. At the top of the chief medical officer of Egypt, and under him were the superintendents and inspectors of physicians, and beneath them were the physicians. Egyptian doctors were very advanced in their knowledge of herbal remedies, surgical techniques. Also part of Egyptian medicine were magic, charms, and spells, which had only psychological effects, if any, on the patient. So engineers, with their mathematical and architectural knowledge, were responsible for planning and building of the monuments, temples, and pyramids of Egypt. The architects were not the actual builders. Instead, they were in charge of a branch of government involved. Then men who did calculations drew up the plans and surveyed the sites and supervised the work. They were scribes. Above the priests and doctors and engineers were high priests, noblemen, whom the pharaoh appointed as his assistants, and generals and administrators, who together formed the government. The vizier was pharaoh's closest advisor. Finally, at the top of the social pyramid was the pharaoh. The pharaoh of Egypt was not simply a king and a ruler, but also considered a god on earth. Now that was the professions, and this is how the social pyramid in ancient Egypt worked. So right at the bottom were soldiers, farmers, and tomb builders, and when you go up, there are craftsmen. Craftsmen include artists, and and we go up to scribes, and when it goes up, it obviously gets smaller and smaller. And above the craftsmen, there are scribes. So scribes, such as general duties, I guess they know how to write and read. So they had some options, but above them, there were high scribes. I guess they have to go through an advanced course to become priests, engineers, and doctors. And we go above that. And the fun part of this doctors is there is a pyramid within the doctor in also the doctor and profession too. So that is very like today. I guess above that would be high priests and nobles. And on top of that, gets smaller and smaller, and will be viziers. I think that viziers will be only a handful, I think. And obviously, at the very top is the pharaohs. They are the god on earth. So now let's look at Egyptian homes. Villagers, such as tomb builders, farmers, and the like, lived in a cramped village with narrow streets near the tomb sites or farmlands. The houses were were made of bricks. The brick were made of mud and chopped straw, molded and dried in the hot Egyptian sun. These dwellings deteriorated after time, and new ones were built right on top of the crumbled materials, creating hills called tells. Only the buildings that were meant to last forever were made of stones. The homes themselves were squashed in shape with a vent of the roof and narrow windows. The front of the space of the house was used by the villagers for his trade and possibly for keeping some livestock. The living area was shared by the family. There was little furniture, safe beds, and some small chests for keeping clothes. Kitchen was at the back of the house. There might be an underground cellar for storage, and there was no running water and sometimes the little single well served the entire town. Egyptian villagers spent most of their time out of doors. They often slept, cooked, ate atop of their houses' flat roofs. Two examples of actually excavated villages were El Amarna and Deir el Medina. They were home to the workers of the Theban royal tombs. There was a single street with 10 houses on either side. The houses in this village had 3 large rooms, a yard, and the kitchen. Underground cellars for storage and niches in the wall that statues of household gods. Wealthy Egyptian people had spacious estates with comfortable houses. The houses had high ceilings with pillars, barred windows, tiled floors, painted walls, and staircases leading up to the flat roof where one could overlook the estate. There would be pools and gardens, servants' quarter, wells, granaries, stables, and a small shrine for worship. A wealthy lived in the countryside or on the outskirts of the town. Just as today. The ancient Egyptians, even wealthy ones, had a very limited assortment of furnitures, and a low square stool the corner of which flared upward, and the top was placed. A leather seat or cushion was the most common type of furniture. Yes, so chairs were rare and they only belonged to the very wealthy. Small tables were made of wood and wicker and had 3 to 4 legs, and beds were made of woven mat placed on a wooden frame standing on animal-shaped legs. At one end of the footboard and the other's headrest made of a curved neckline piece at the top of the short pillar on an oblong base. A lampstand held lamps of simple bowl of pottery containing oil and a wick. Chests were used to store domestic possessions such as linens, clothing, jewelry, and makeup. So that was the Egyptian homes section, and I guess that it's similar to today's structure to some point, where the working class live in a crowded area and the more nobles and rich people, wealthy ones, live a little bit far away and has a lot more stuff and has a swimming pool and all these servants' quarter and things. Yes, it's very crowded at the working class area, especially the tomb builders town called Amarna. So living conditions were better in the more well-planned town of Deir el Medina. It's more structured, but the Amarna layout was very, very crowded and not very well structured, well planned, thought out. It's just a pile of stuff together. But it's okay. They spent most of their time out of the house, which is good. And now we are going to look into the clothing and jewelry section. Fashion for men and women, rich or poor, changed very little over the centuries in ancient Egypt. The clothing worn by men and women was made of linen, and it was very lightweight for the hot climate. All men, from the tomb worker to the pharaoh, wore a kind of a kilt or apron that varied in length over the years. From halfway above the knee to halfway below it, it was tied in the front and folded at the side, and in 2 knots at the hip. A sleeved shirt-like garment also became fashionable. Men were always clean-shaven. They used razors made from bronze to shave their heads and beards. Women wore straight ankle-length dresses that usually had straps that tied at the neck or behind the shoulders. Some dresses had short sleeves, or women would wore some short robes tied above their shoulders. Later fashions showed that the linen was folded in many tiny vertical pleats and fringe that were put at the edges. Wealthy people wore sandals made of leather that had straps across the instep and between the first and second toes. Egyptians adorned themselves with as much as jewelry as they could afford. Wealthy people wore broadcloth made of gold and precious stones like together, with fastened with the back of the neck. Pairs of bracelets were worn around the wrists or high on the arms above the elbow. Rings and anklets were worn. Women wore large round earrings and put bands around their heads, or held their hair in a place with ivory and metal hairpins. Ordinary people wore necklaces made of brightly colored pottery beads. I like the sound of the pottery beads. Now, ancient Egyptians cared about their appearances a great deal. The women spent a lot of time bathing, rubbing oils and perfumes into their skin, and using their many cosmetic implements to apply makeup and style their wigs, using a highly polished bronze hand mirror. A woman would apply kohl, a black dye kept in a jar or pot, to line their eyes and eyebrows using a brush or a pencil made of reed. Men wore this eye makeup as well, which is not only a fashion but also protected against the infections which were common in Egypt. They would use a dye called henna to redden their nails and lips. Wigs were worn by men and women. Women would place a cone made of fat soaked in sweet smelling ointment in their head, which slowly melted over her wig during a warm evening, which is very not practical, I guess, but that was the necessities back then. It's very important to note that the ancient Egyptians did not have much in terms of furnitures. It was mainly something like a desk, a chair that looks like a chair, just a simple type of chair, and that is made of wood at the frames, and the base would be made of animal skin, leather. So not much, mainly potteries and the house, I guess. Not much. And when there's a chest, small little chest in a house, it would contain all of the important things that you need to put in the chest, like makeup and cloth and clothes, linen. Very important. And they also had a bronze mirror that is similar to what you can have, a hand mirror. And that is the history of clothing and jewelry. Very important, very important. Another point to add was the eye makeup was not only helping to keep infections away from the eye, but also to keep away the help the eye from glares of the sun. As you know, Egypt could be a very hot and sunny place, needs some protection from the sun. And let's now look at women in ancient Egypt. Egypt's society was typically male dominated. The word of the man of the house was the law, and the wife was in many ways her husband's servant. On the other hand, Egyptian women enjoyed far more rights and privileges than in other lands, and modern as well as ancient. On the downside, Egyptian wives had to share their husband with other women. Most men could not afford a harem as the pharaoh could, but had a primary wife and one or more concubines who were permanently locked into a subordinate position that could leave them helplessly open to humiliation. At banquets, wives and husbands were usually seated separately. A husband who was angry with his wife could banish her to her quarters and could beat her within limits. And that's not a very good thing to do. An Egyptian woman paid for adultery with her life, even by burning at the stakes, while it was no crime at all for a man. The Egyptian portrayal of men was outstanding, heroic, and true, while women were portrayed as frivolous, spiteful, and false. On the upside, reliefs and pictures show the most important role of the housewives, and that the Egyptian husband were aware that it took two to make a marriage. Some sagely advice to husband was, "Thou shouldst not supervise thy wife in her house when thou knowest she is efficient. Do not say to her, 'Where is it? Fetch it for us,' when she has put it in the most useful place. Let thine eye have regard while thou art silent, and thou mayest recognize her abilities." In ancient Greece, women were second-class creatures who lived apart, close off in a special area in a house. Entertaining, sports, even casual passing of time were for men only. So, in ancient Egypt, husband and wife chatted together, listened to music together, and threw parties together. A wife even went along on her husband's hunting forays to keep him company. Egyptian women shared with men important legal right that in many other nations were totally denied them. They were allowed to own lands, operate businesses, testify in court, and bring actions against man. Egyptian women enjoyed dimensions of freedom greater than any other counterparts from other places in ancient times. Now that would be the end of the topic of women in ancient Egypt. Of course, there are ups and downs. I guess the legal system back in the ancient Egypt was more lenient, more inclusive of women back in ancient Egypt, but the social acceptance was also not a very good one, and it was, considered okay to beat the wives, but if she is to go and seek a legal help, she could do that. And women could also divorce their husbands, which is very very modern concept. If you think about, in the 1500s, women were not allowed to divorce the husband, and even 1800s, women were not allowed to inherit anything, which is just beyond their time, really. I think women had it pretty good back then, except for the fact that any physical violation could happen. But take it with a little grain of salt. I think there's a lot of people who survived in the ancient Egypt, so I think that they have had it really good. Now, let's look into the foods and drinks of the ancient Egypt. Food and drink. The Egyptians were very secure in that the Nile Valley always yielded enough to feed the country, even when famine was present in other nearby parts of the world. The Egyptians' basic food and drink, bread and beer, were made from main crops they grew: wheat and barley. There were many types of bread, including pastries and cakes. Since there was no sugar, honey was used as a sweetener by the rich, and the poor people used dates and fruits juices. Egyptians liked strong tasting vegetables such as garlic and onions. They thought these were good for the health, which obviously they are. If you look at the properties of garlic and onions, whenever I get sick, I drink a garlic soup. Very nice and very, very helpful. They thought that these were good for the health. They also ate peas and beans, lettuce, cucumber, and leeks. Vegetables were often served with an oil and vinegar dressing. Figs, dates, pomegranates, and grapes were the only fruits that could be grown in a hot climate. The rich could afford to make wine from their grapes. Ordinary people ate fish and poultry, which is a lot healthier than other diets. Fish is very important on the development of the healthy body and healthy mind. On special occasions, they ate sheep, goat, or pig. There was little grazing land and available so the meat was expensive and most people ate it only on festive occasions. Egyptians stored their food in jars and granaries. Fish and meat had to be specially prepared for storage. One method was salting it. Another was to hang up the fish in the sun, which baked them dry, just like how it's prepared today. Beef jerkies are hanged to dry. I don't think it's hanged to dry in the sunlight, but it's the similar method. And salting it is similar to as we do today. Salted fish, right? It was back then. Oh, good. And in ordinary families, the cooking was done by the housewife, but larger household employed servants to cook and work for the kitchen, and the chef, usually a man, to do the cooking. The Egyptians had ovens and knew how to broil, roast, and fry food. There were few kitchen tools, pestles and mortars and sieves. And that would be the food and drink section of ancient Egypt. To note, there are a lot of informations available. They had cakes, they had pastries. Main food source was from wheat and barley, which would give them nice energy. And the rich could eat honey, and the poor could have their sweets from dates and fruit juices, which is very healthy too. And the food was very, very balanced type of food, balanced meal, and yes, it looks good. I guess that I'm pretty impressed with the type of preservation methods they used with the salt and the drying method. I guess that it was there a long time ago. We still use the drying method in some countrysides these days too. In the Alaska, I guess they have when they have fish, they will hang it upside down on a line and then make it dried, and could enjoy the fish overall throughout the year, keeping it dry and safe from any kind of deterioration. Which I think the main source of drink was made of is beer, I think. And the beer they had was not really the carbonated beer that we have these days. It was more like a natural type of beer, and it did have some wheat particles in it, and it had less of an alcohol intake inside, I guess, a few percent less. And I guess that's how they survived. Very overall, the ancient Egyptian structure, professions, very, very, very interesting. And in women were actually, this topic did not reveal, was women were also able to pursue a career back in ancient Egypt, which also, it only depends on the type of family that you were born in. So if you were born in a sort of scribes or higher scribes family, father or mother, their children could be scribes and higher scribes. And if it's a woman, they could also become a doctor if they practiced and went to school and educated themselves. It's seems like a great working community. It's such an interesting thing to look at. So, I'm thinking of the next Egyptian deeper level of Egyptian histories. I would like to look into the Egyptian doctor and prescriptions, medicines, how they evolved over time. I believe that they still use, to some extent, the type of methods they used to use back then, which is very interesting and just shows how we learned from our past, our ancestors. I guess their past and their ancestors. I do not believe I have any Egyptian blood. But it's such an interesting thing to learn and to grow, like, from learning from the past. So thank you for joining us today, for learning the ancient Egyptians' daily lives and the professions, Egyptian homes, Egyptian clothing and jewelries, women, and food and drinks. And see you at another lesson. Thanks. Goodbye.